It is our pleasure to be joined by the host of The Late Kick with Josh Pate. He is the fastest rising star in all of college football media. 24/7 Sports is his home. Josh Pate is in the house. What's going on, man?
Listen to that. Do you hear that?
I messed up. I kind of messed up. Like it could have been better, but I feel pretty good about it. But what's going on, man? You are a busy man now.
We're busy. Yeah. So I had to do a talk yesterday, Ikard, about this. I actually, so listen, I went to Columbus State University, or as we like to call it, the Oklahoma of West Central Georgia. And I went to Columbus State. I didn't know what I was doing. So I left school for a little while. I didn't even graduate until like my mid-20s. And I was on academic expulsion. This is a great story for the kids out there. I was on academic expulsion. This big committee had to meet to let me back into school. I'm getting somewhere with this. So like by one vote, the committee votes me back in, and I ended up graduating. Ended up being a good story. But can you imagine what the odds would have been back then if I told you that years later that same faculty was going to have me be their keynote speaker for like their introduction to the semester? So I was talking to him yesterday, and one of the questions the staff asked was, "What's your schedule like? That must be such a grind." And I said, "Well, it is. I don't have a scheduled off day until Thanksgiving. And then the next one's December 23rd. However, as you know, it's not really work if all you're doing is talking about the stuff that you would be doing for fun anyway." And I told them, hey, that period of time between me being in school the first time and me being in school the second time, I worked construction, AC installation, and worked in a fabric warehouse. So I would much prefer where I am now to the normal 8 or 9 hour days in that world.
Well, I would ask you an air conditioning question, make sure I've got my units serviced and ready to go. But your specialty now is college football, man. And it's been cool. I feel like there's been almost a fairly recent big evolution in the way that it's covered. I don't feel like it's ever been as year round as it is right now. It's slowly getting almost to the NFL style where you've got the combine and then you've got the draft and you got OTAs and there's just like a calendar to it. And college football doesn't necessarily have that, but it's really turned into a fantastic year. Like you can focus year round on specifically college football. And it didn't feel like you could do that as much in the past.
I always thought you could do it. I thought you needed to be a little more creative. Now, it's no mystery that as the calendar has evolved and as we've had things like the portal and NIL pop up and this year conference realignment, last couple of years actually, yeah, that helps. But back in 2014, a local news station down in Columbus, Georgia, pitched me the idea of doing my own college football show. And it was weird because they asked me, hey, do you want to do this weeknights for us? But then they said, okay, you need to sell us on being able to do it year round. It was their idea, but they wanted me to sell them on it. And I told them how recruiting actually works, how spring ball actually works, how the college football calendar could be leveraged. But Teddy, what you're talking about there and what happened about 6 or 7 years ago is anybody like me, for example, who did not have the classical media upbringing. I didn't have a degree from Northwestern or Syracuse. I didn't play the game like some of you guys did, for example, or coach the game. And so I didn't have that natural in. I didn't have a family member that owned the media company. We were largely excluded from ever getting our voice heard or ever having it amplified because you needed overhead and you needed distribution. And overhead meant a big fancy studio somewhere, and distribution meant, well, a syndication deal so that you could get your voice out to the masses. That wasn't happening until platforms like Facebook and platforms like YouTube decided, you know what we can do with our infrastructure? We can stream video. And then podcasting kind of blew up too. And all of a sudden it was like a multi-Berlin Wall effect where everybody all of a sudden had access to what only a few used to have access to. But what it's done, it's happening in preview magazine culture too. What it's done is you've gotten some challengers from some independent voices. A lot of them aren't qualified. Some of them are qualified. And it gives the audience more freedom of choice. And I think it's good. I think it's been good for our industry as a whole. I think some coaches, when it comes to the year-round nature of college football, would argue, that part hasn't been good for our well-being and sanity and whatnot. And I think that'll be addressed in time. But it's a really interesting confluence of events. You got far more voices at the table. You got more to talk about. And hey, at least in our world, it's been a really good thing.
So I definitely want to talk to you about, this upcoming 2022 season and everything you're going to have going on. But this last year, right? And I said it in the intro, half joking, but it's true. I don't think anyone has enhanced their brand more than you have in the college football media space over the last year. So what has the last year been like for you? Like what has this ride been like for you? I know it's not slowing down anytime soon. You guys got big plans, but it just has to be different, man, right? Because and it's not like you were completely unknown, but just the amount of people that are consuming your content over the last year, like it's taken off, man. What's it been like?
Oh, it's been a really, really fun ride. It's been validating, but when I watch the best coaches out there, when I listen to the best leaders out there, before I ever touched a microphone, okay, so this is years back, one of the things I started to realize when they would speak is they would always say we when they were talking about success. And they would say I when they were talking about failure. And I realized that. Now, I didn't fully get it yet, but I realized it. And now today, when I am part of a successful product, I totally get it because I know who's behind the scenes. Like I know how many people had to sign off to even give me the opportunity to have the platform. I work for CBS. I'm not independent anymore. And yet they give me all the resources, but they don't get in the way. I mean, last night, I kid you not, last night's show was the first time I ever had to even speak to anyone in HR or PR. And that's because we were talking about the TV deal, and there's a lot of red tape around that right now. Otherwise, no one has ever stepped in and so much as suggested me talk about anything. So that's been a godsend. But it's also, here was the deal, Gabe. 2 years ago, when we entered COVID, it was one of the worst times a lot of us have ever experienced. Some of us lost family members. But if you just zoom it into sports and you take out all the other real world stuff, our industry evolved greatly. A lot of stuff changed in our space. It would be ignorant to suggest otherwise. And what happened, you don't have to take a political side on this to acknowledge it. A lot of folks out there in the college football public changed their opinion and changed their desires of who they wanted to listen to because of the avenues that some people went down. I made a conscious effort not to ever let you know what I thought about that stuff, and still do today. And it sounds so commonsensical, but we saw such a shift in our traffic 2 years ago, and we've seen it kind of scale since then, just because we stuck to what we promised you we're going to stick to. A lot of folks claim they're going to stick to something, they don't stick to it. We've just stuck to it, and we got a loyal audience, and it grows by the tens of thousands every month.
It's good stuff. It's impressive, and it's fun to watch people have success in this industry. Let's talk some football. We got a big season coming up. There's a lot that's kind of teetering on the brink, right? We've got some conference realignment stuff that's going to happen here in the future. We've got network deals happening. We got, maybe we don't know what the college football playoffs going to look like, but for now, this season, at least this season is locked in how we've known college football here for a little while. Who's some of your favorite teams going into the year?
I'm scared that I'm talking myself into Michigan. I'm really scared that's happening. And I remember last year watching them towards the end of the year. I was up there for the Ohio State-Michigan game. I was at their playoff game against Georgia. Those were two different tales. But I remember watching and then thinking, I wonder if this is duplicable. I wonder if this is finally a model that Harbaugh has found where it's not so much do I know the names, because he'll just carry it over. But then all that stuff in the January, February timeframe happened, and it looks like he's gone and he's not gone. And I just think it's going to end up not mattering this year. I really think they've got a good team. It's one of the most secret good offenses in America. They don't throw the ball 50 times a game, so they don't get as much national recognition. They won't have a Heisman contender on that roster, but O-line checks out. They got two quarterbacks they think they can win with. They're probably in as good a situation at that position as they've been in a long time. This Michigan wide receiver stable does not look like a Michigan wide receiver stable. They got two dependable tight ends, both about 6'4", 245 or 250. They're big, they're physical, and everyone, I think, from what I've heard nationally, just assumes they've got to fall off. And I don't know that they have to fall off. I know why Ohio State's the overwhelming favorite in that conference, but here's the beautiful part of that. They've got to play them. That's the way that Big Ten schedule works. They got to play them every year. So Michigan's one. It's easy to talk about Bama. It's easy to talk about Ohio State. I really wonder about Georgia. You know, I grew up in Georgia, and I always said, whenever that team ends up winning a title, whenever that is, there will be such a hangover around the program and in that state that there's no way they win any more than 10 games the next year. But what's interesting is the way this past few months has played out and the way that roster has played out or shaken out is I don't know that they're going to be victim of some of the same complacency issues that you would worry about. Because number one, no one's talked about Georgia. We've had so much other stuff to talk about. No one's had time to really heap the incredible amounts of praise on their shoulders you would normally expect. And number two, they lost all the defensive stars. And when I say stars, I mean guys you know. So they've got some unproven guys on defense that have to earn their stripes, so to speak. And here's the really unique part. When is the last time you saw a national champion return a quarterback and the quarterback not be on any preseason watch list of any kind? And so I think that even losing Burton at wide receiver, Georgia's got some of the best receiver talent they've had in quite a while. I'm not trying to endorse them as a bona fide title contender. I am saying I think they're going to be right there in the mix again, and they'll enter that same conversation as Bama, where you learn that some of the metrics like returning starters, percentage of returning production, that stuff's kind of going to become irrelevant with Georgia. They'll just be one of the exceptions to the rule. The other one I'm really excited to watch, and aside from OU and Texas and the Big 12, I'm excited to watch Baylor. I'm excited to watch Utah. I think a lot of what people said about them at the end of last year about, man, if we would have had a wild card spot, if we would have had a 6 or an 8-team playoff and they would have gotten in, look out. Well, I don't personally advocate for that. But what I will advocate for is if that's the case, back it up. Show it to me in the 2022 season. They're going to give you 12 games. So if you are what you think you are, you'll be there at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so I think heading in the year, a lot of people just view it as a 3-horse race between Bama, Ohio State, and Georgia. So are you saying that out of all the other teams across the country that you think could factor into that national championship picture? Is it Michigan? Is it Clemson, Notre Dame? When you look at, the preseason polls, like who do you think the teams most likely to challenge those three realistically for a national title are?
Yeah, I do think it's Michigan. It's because I love the Bear Bryant quote. We got a different bunch of excuses when you lose, but the same stuff wins that has always won. I mean, owning the lines of scrimmage, it always will win. There's no way to reinvent this game where that doesn't matter. Also, I think at the quarterback position, people look at them and say, you're good enough to win 10 games in the Big Ten. You're not good enough to do anything beyond that. Well, first off, that's nothing to shake a stick at, as Meemaw would say. Winning the Big Ten is a pretty big deal. They did it last year in dominant fashion, as it turns out, at the end of the year. And then they ran up against the eventual national champ. And what we saw there is they couldn't do anything against a generational defensive front. We only saw Alabama able to move the ball at all against Georgia. That was in the SEC title game, and that was with a really, really strong vertical passing game. So I look at Michigan, and I think they still got the stuff that got them to where they were last year. I know that's not how football works, but they've got the pieces. They've got that DNA. They've gotten deeper and better at wide receiver. Ronnie Bell, for example, is a guy that they lost last year that they'll get back this year. They've got two guys, like I said, to choose from. They've also got some really good running back depth and talent. So I look at them and I think to myself, there's nothing really standing in their way of getting right back on the doorstep. If they get in the door, they may have a little bit more than a puncher's chance this time around. So I don't know, because you gotta sell me. I'll put it this way. You got to sell me on anyone else that has the firepower, but also has the line of scrimmage talent necessary to win. You guys have watched it as well as I have. Okay, we've seen Oklahoma do it before. We've seen them get in that setting under Lincoln Riley and have the firepower. They got the fireworks, but the steak, like the meat and potatoes, maybe not necessarily be there to compete at that level. And I almost think I'd rather have the meat and potatoes and let's see how many fireworks I can add on to it. because when I get into a playoff situation, it's not a guarantee that I'm going to win if I do have that fortified offensive line, defensive line combo. It's a guarantee I won't win if I don't have it, though.
Yeah. Good stuff. I want to give you three teams. I think they are massively overrated this year. It's like from the talking heads during talking season. These are three teams that are really getting pumped up there. Make a case for them or totally shoot them down. Whatever you want. Texas A&M, Texas, USC.
Texas is the easiest to shoot down because what held them back last year, I don't know, has been fortified. I don't know that it's been rectified. You know, they were a mess on the offensive line last year. Well, we fast forward to this year. They could not even get through spring because they didn't have enough healthy bodies on the offensive line to conduct spring practices. They didn't have a spring game because, in part, they couldn't even construct a two deep on the offensive line. I'm reading practice reports, getting some intel out of Austin. They've already got a true freshman running with the ones at right guard. They've got Kelvin Banks, I think, running with the twos at left tackle. It's assumed that maybe he eventually overtakes them. So you've probably got multiple true freshmen playing pivotal roles on the offensive line, which historically has not been a recipe for long-term success. Pass rush, I also don't know that they rectified wholesale. And then you add into that the fact that you got probably a first-time starter at quarterback in Quinn Ewers. So, you know, they're going to be such a feast or famine team because of those fireworks that they do have, but also the question marks on some of the other most important parts of their team. Texas A&M is the more interesting one to me because A&M, I've watched them in person for 2 years now and watched them get off the bus and said to myself, they look the most like Bama or Georgia getting off the bus. Physically, that's what they've looked like. Where they have not resembled some, you know, challengers for the national championship is at the quarterback position. And that stat, I think I've recited this a million times over the past few months. For them to have the talent pool that they do and have finished 90th in pass plays of 20 yards or more is absurd. And I had a coach a couple of weeks ago when I was talking to him about A&M. He said, hey, you want to have some fun, go chart A&M last year and tell me how many times they shifted pre-snap. How many times did they have motion elements in their offense pre-snap? And I said, well, I don't have time to do it. I'm guessing not very much. He said, well, that's right. You know why that is? Why is that? That's because Jimbo Fisher thinks he doesn't need it. It's not that he doesn't think his players can process the, the intricacies of the pre-snap motion. It's he thinks that if his offense is executed exactly right, then they don't need that stuff. And technically he's right. But the problem is he's not putting 11 robots on the field. Like, they're humans. And sometimes humans don't do exactly what they're supposed to do. They don't square off that in route exactly at 11 yards. And so it just, watching them, it's felt like they have to execute everything so perfectly. It seems like a first down is such a chore to get in that offense. And I wonder,
you're making it
we've had
unnecessarily easy on the defense. Like, there's
right.
Like, even if you do just one motion is changes everything for a defense.
And if you're not going to use a bunch of motion, normally you're playing with a lot of tempo, right? And that is where you're making up for the lack of confusion that you're not causing a defense by using shifts and motions. You're making up by playing fast. Texas A&M does not do that.
Right. And so you don't do the one thing you think you would do, but you still do that other thing. And I had him on the show a couple of times over the past 4 months. So I asked him, like, specifically, have you been good enough? Do you watch what you guys have done and been good enough? He says, no, of course not. And then you ask him, okay, well, what are you going to change? And it's always that, well, it's coach speak, basically. He doesn't really give you a solid answer. But, I remember back at the spring game, it was like 40-mile-an-hour winds out there, and they threw the ball down the field all afternoon anyway. And afterwards, he said, we did that today, regardless of weather, because the game doesn't count, but also because we know we've got to do that this fall. Well, we'll see. Okay. Because my whole point is, if they do that, that's all they've lacked. Any kind of explosivity in the passing game, and therefore a more formidable offense. That's what they've lacked. They're not a team that's miles away. Texas has got big holes. A&M does not have big holes. They've got some course correction to make offensively. But if they do, I had a scenario posed to me on last night's show of which conference, if any, could put two teams in the playoff. And I think if I were to power rate where it's most likely, that Bama and A&M combo, they got tough schedules, both of them do. But that's the one where you could afford to lose and still have all the makeup ground in the world because the other one's going to be highly ranked, blah, blah, blah. Who was the third one after A&M?
USC.
USC, yeah. I don't think we need to talk too much about this. I mean, I know Caleb Williams gets a lot of attention, and they brought in a lot of portal talent. When you listen to Lincoln Riley talk, and you listen to how careful he is, and how conservative he is when he's talking about expectations for them this year, it's all tied into what he knows he doesn't have along the lines of scrimmage. He gets that. I mean, coaches know when they don't have it, and they don't. They're going to win some games out there, and they're probably going to hang some really crooked numbers a couple of times this year that will get the casual crowd drunk on, well, when that team's right. How many times have we heard this sentence? That's the team you don't want to play in November. Well, the reason you're having to say it that way is because they already lost 3 games, because they aren't consistent enough. This is not Major League Baseball. You don't get right in mid-August and have 40 more games to play. I mean, it's football. They give you 12 of them. And I don't think they'll be consistent enough this year. If there were another team other than Utah to come out of that conference, ironically, I think it would be Oregon. Not that I'm endorsing them, but I think that would probably, or maybe a sneaky, ultra sneaky UCLA. I do not think it would be USC.
Right. I feel the same. And I've said it many times. If Lincoln Riley wins, 9 games in year 1,
yeah,
that's a hell of a year 1. I mean, it's a hell of a year 1. But yeah, the expectations around that program, a lot going on clearly. Now anyone that is not listening to the Late Kick with Josh Pate is making a grave error. We
grave mistake.
A grave mistake. But one of the things you do on your podcast is talk about your bold predictions heading into the season. So what are a couple? You only can pick a couple. What are a couple of your boldest predictions? You've already hitched your wagon to Michigan, so that's bold enough, I think. But what are a couple of the other bold predictions you have heading into the 2022 college football season?
Well, I made this prediction, and I didn't think it was bold, but got told that it's bold, and that is Notre Dame finishing in the top 4 in recruiting. They have the number 1 class right now. And the thing that doesn't make this bold at all is if I were to just hit the stop button today, they've, according to our team rankings, let me put it that way, according to our team rankings at 24/7, they already have a class that if they didn't add another piece would have rated as number 5 last year. Texas was the number 5 class last year, and Notre Dame's already rated higher than them. And I think they're going to add a couple more pieces. So it's going to be a huge win on the recruiting trail for Marcus Freeman. Now, whether they go over that 9-win preseason total, that I don't have a great feel on. But as for on the field this year, I believe I'll give you one. So I think Ole Miss is going to fall off a little bit. I think Ole Miss under 7.5 wins, if we're talking, betting terminology. I used to be high on them. This is why I always emphasize not to get married to your preseason or spring takes, because in spring I would have told you, hey, I love Ole Miss to be right back there again. But the more I took a dive in, the more I talked to some folks around the league over the summer, there will be a wobbly tire somewhere in the SEC West. There will be too many good teams over there, too many talented rosters. So if you have even a sniff of wobble over there, you're falling right to the back of the pack. And Ole Miss, they do not have a replacement for Matt Corral at quarterback. I'm just telling you, they don't. You can read the headlines about Jackson Dart all you want to. You can hear them say, Luke Altmaier's a serviceable backup. He was a serviceable backup. We're not looking for serviceable. We're looking for a guy who can really do it at a high level. And if they don't have the quarterback that can pull the trigger at a really high level, I personally am not a believer that this recipe of let's go get 14 or 15 pieces out of the transfer portal, shake them up, throw them on the field, call it a football team. It may work out. And God bless them if it does. I don't think that is a recipe to just hang around in that 9 or 10 win range again this year. So I'm a little bit lower on Ole Miss. And how bold is it? You guys got to tell me this. How bold is it to think that Baylor's going to win the Big 12? Is that pretty bold?
No. No, I think with what they've got back along the line of scrimmage, right? The offensive line, defensive line are intact. And, when just seeing them push Oklahoma around, especially in the second half of that game in person, that I think they're going to be very physical along the line of scrimmage. And this is something Teddy and I have talked a lot about, the fact that Dave Aranda did what he did with Gary Bohannon's situation, I
Scares
think
you.
it tells us, it sends the message to us at least that Blake Shapen's going to be pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So they got playmakers to replace on both sides of the ball, but you feel good about them at the line of scrimmage and at the quarterback position. And Dave Aranda's a hell of a football coach. There's a lot to like about Baylor, man.
And
So
I'll
two
just add
things were
this real quickly. I don't think it's not necessarily bold. I don't think that it's going to happen. And that's because of Oklahoma. I think everyone is massively undervaluing Oklahoma. I think this is kind of bold, but I mean, people will take it as bold. I don't. I think Oklahoma will be better or at least as good at every single position group than they were last year.
I say that's bold.
Including quarterback.
That's bolder than anything I've said.
Well, it's really not though, whenever you just kind of like you break it down and look at it, like specifically quarterback. I say they'll be better at quarterback than they were last year. I'm not saying that Dylan Gabriel is going to be a better quarterback in the future than Caleb Williams will be. I'm saying that what he does this year will not just be better than what Caleb Williams did last year. It will far exceed what Caleb Williams did last year. I mean, there's a lot kind of gets lost in what Caleb Williams' real year was like last year. And
he was a true freshman playing quarterback
right.
in the Big 12 conference. There were some moments that he was fantastic where you're like, oh my gosh, look at the talent, look at the ability. There's also a lot of mistakes. So I think it'll just be more consistent at the quarterback position. Kind of, Josh, they'll kind of know what they're getting, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. I get that totally. So my counter, I don't have a counter with Oklahoma. Like I'm high on Oklahoma, so I'm not anti-Sooner or anything. But when I look at Baylor, if I'm trying to pick who's going to win the Big 12, you know how there are always these times when we've seen the season play out and we're sitting there in December, so we have all our answers. You know how sometimes you look back and you say to yourself, I should have known when this happened. I should have known when that happened. What you just talked about, Ikard, that whole deal with the quarterback situation in the spring, that feels like such a telltale sign that I don't want to be the guy in December saying, I should have known when Dave Aranda could have chosen to keep his quarterback that he rode all the way to the Big 12 championship last year. And he chose to not only make the switch, but do it early enough where he showed his quarterback the ability to hit the exit door. I should have known he had himself a sneaky good squad. I should have known when they returned all those pieces on the defensive line that was their hallmark last year, including that plug in the middle. I should have known. And I don't want to be saying that about myself. Also, what else was magical about that day last year where they beat Oklahoma? Two things. First, that's the day I met you in person, Ikard, and I thank God every day.
Yeah, baby. That's the first time I saw those biceps in person. Let's go.
I'm turning my video off. And the second thing that happened that day was after the game, right before Aranda's presser. This is why the quarterback thing's so significant with me. We were with Aranda, and he's crying, and he's talking about his quarterback, and it just illustrates to me when you fast forward a few months how difficult that decision must have been, but also how much it personifies that whole team over player mindset that you have to have as a coach. That had to be some restless nights in the Dave Aranda household of knowing that kid did what he did for us, and yet I'm still about to tell him you're second best, and we got to make a decision here. But they did it, and I think it's going to pay dividends for him this fall. I think that at the very least, I think everyone can admit that that's a team that's in every game. And at that point, you got like 5 teams in the Big 12. That thing could go either way. So if I have if I don't have an Alabama out in the Big 12, for example, I like my chances with a team with the kind of dynamic that Baylor has.
Yeah. And the one thing about Baylor, and I tell people this all the time, I believe in the systems, right? Jeff Grimes and what he does offensively, it's my favorite system in all of college football. But I'm a wide zone guy.
Inside out, both sides of the ball.
I'm a wide zone guy, and then clearly the creativity that Dave Aranda and Roberts bring to the defensive side of things. We're like, I believe in what they do offensively and defensively, and I believe in the culture of the program. So that also factors into me. I think Baylor's going to play for the Big 12 title. I think they're going to play Oklahoma for it, but I don't understand anyone that's looking at Baylor going, no, they're not going to be any good. I can't get on board with that.
It's people who worship stats. It's people who see that, what is it, 126th in returning production. And
right.
I have thought for a long time, returning starters is one of the more overrated stats we have in our game. Now, if you want to talk about returning production, I'll give that a little bit more credence. But at what point do you get your hands dirty and get in the weeds a little bit and understand not all models are the same, not all systems are the same, not all philosophies are the same? And you just mentioned offense and defense with Aranda. You know, they made holistic changes year 1 to year 2 under him. And they made like game management, tactical type changes in philosophy. And he's talked about it since then, but there were some times in his first year there, dude, they I don't know how many times they punted in opponent territory. And all of a sudden he said, what we're doing is not good enough, dude. We actually want to win.
He learned that he could go for it on 4th and short, Josh.
Yeah, it is allowed. It is allowed.
I'll tell you what I think is really interesting about Baylor. Like, I think it's great. You're talking about a lot of people are stat driven. You were at the Oklahoma Baylor game. All right. What was the final? 27-14?
I believe so.
27
down in the 4th.
Well, if you see the highlights of that game, or you look at the box score of that game, other than they ran the ball like 45 times for like 285 on us, but if you're there witnessing, you know that was an absolute ass kicking. Like Baylor they are tough as hell. They are physical as hell. And that stuff doesn't show up in the stat sheet. And I think there's a couple of teams in the Big 12 that play that way now. So like, just whenever you look at the conference, do you have any other teams that you feel like are maybe flying under the radar a little bit and may have a shot if a couple of things happen for them, or to some other teams that could maybe be there in the end and who knows, try and win a Big 12?
Yeah. So the reason I don't want to say Kansas State is because everyone else in the entire country and some people internationally at this point are on Kansas State. So they've gotten enough love.
Guilty.
It's not that I'm against them. I'm just saying,
think
man.
We started that. And
is this
now
where it originated?
I'm off the board. Now I'm like, there's too much Kansas State hype. There's too many questions about Adrian Martinez. I don't know what you're going to get from the wide receiver position. You've got some new pieces offensively. There's too much Kansas State love, Pate. I'm out.
Buy the rumor, sell the news. I like it, Gabe. That's smart.
I get so worried. It's when you think you've said something smart and then a bunch of really average people start echoing it. That's when you question, am I smart? Are they just getting lucky? Or am I thinking on their line of thought all of a sudden? So I get scared about that. You know, I took a lot of flack because I got on the Iowa State train last year. And listen, I cannot say no to the Hulk Hogan color scheme. And I could not say no to just the idea of that. I love what their program represents too. I love the same things about Baylor that I love about Iowa State. And I just wanted to see them break through. So it was my heart a little bit. You know, everyone's discounting them again this year. And it's because they lose Brock Purdy, I think, and Breece Hall. Like, those are the reasons why they're being discounted. Those are valid reasons. But when I look at a team that underachieved mightily, I don't so much care about which pieces you lose, especially if I believe in your culture and your identity. So there are a lot of the hallmarks of that program that are still there too. I almost wonder if there's a team, if there's what I call a Bob team in the Big 12 this year, which is a bounce of ball team. It's that team that just gets the breaks and they get the injury luck on their side. If that's Iowa State, I could see 23-20 favor Cyclones like half a dozen times this year. And all of a sudden they're there at the end of the year and you're going, how has this team wound up in the Big 12 title picture this late in the year? And there's nothing flashy about them. There's nothing special. They're just kind of, Hunter Deckers is good enough at quarterback. They found adequate enough replacements. That's a team I'm interested to watch. I'm not going to go so far as to say I'm putting my own shekels on them, but it's one I'm interested to watch. If, like Teddy said, there is another team that kind of fits that description.
I'll tell you this. The conversations I had with Matt Campbell at Big 12 Media Days, they are very, very excited about Hunter Deckers. He's a more physically gifted player than Brock Purdy.
Boom.
They are going to push it down the field more. And I talked to Xavier Hutchinson about that, and like his eyes lit up talking about him. Campbell also told us while they don't have a Breece Hall in the room, it's the best their running back room's ever been since he's been there, top to bottom. And you got to remember, last year along that offensive line, their 2 tackles went down early. They were playing 5 guards along that offensive line. And at times, the guys that the guards that were having to play tackle, they struggled, which is not a shock. But Will McDonald back on that defensive front? I know they lose Rose and Eisworth, but Haycock's system, like I believe in that system. I think Iowa State's going to be a lot better than people think they're going to be.
Okay, you sold me. You sold me on my pick. I appreciate that. That's what I came here.
I'm here to help you, man. I'm here to back you up. That's what I'm here to do.
People helping people.
Yeah.
I'm interested in just kind of your overall thoughts on OU Venables, like the way that the whole situation broke down, what you expect for year one, why you're high on them, why maybe some of the reasons that are holding you back from even being higher, just kind of some overall thoughts.
Yeah. So I have a weird way of thinking about this. And it's because I don't do it as much as I used to, but I used to be so gambling centric in the way that I thought in preseason. In the regular season, it's just football every week. But if you're trying to project, I've never thought there's a ton of skill in us going win, loss, because we don't know how health and depth is going to work out. We don't know any of that. Weather, we don't know anything. So what I chose to do for a long time is I used to say, okay, well, let me just try and simulate the season 100 times. What's the most likely outcome? And unfortunately, when you're doing that, you have to factor in the possibility of injury. And Oklahoma is disproportionately exposed at quarterback, which a lot of teams are. It's college football. You don't have a 5 deep of really good quarterbacks, but Oklahoma's a little bit disproportionately exposed there. So you cross every finger you have, that doesn't matter. If you could guarantee me a season where we have health, game 1 through 12 at quarterback, then it becomes a little bit different. And then all of a sudden, like if you're trying to sell me Oklahoma Big 12 champ, they're up there as either the favorite or the co-favorite for a reason. So I don't have doubts about the team. I don't have doubts about the relative strength of the staff. I'll also just put in a little side note here. What I'm paying as close attention to this year with Oklahoma as on field is them maintaining and even seemingly increasing speed in recruiting. This has been the underreported story nationally with Oklahoma. They came in there as a new staff, and they signed a class about as highly rated as anything that Lincoln had. Now, an outsider could look at that and say, yeah, but you just held together what he had already done. We'll see what you do on your own. Okay, that's this cycle. Now they're out there on the open sea. They're on their own, and they're rolling in recruiting. And that's, to me, what would have been reasonable to doubt. You're bringing in a lifer as a defensive coordinator into the Big 12. I'm sure defensive guys are going to want to play for him. Can he attract offensive talent? Can he attract quarterback, offensive perimeter skill? Dude, look at their class. Ink is not dry on paper yet or anything, but if those guys are sticking with Oklahoma and I get a 9 or a 10-win season on the field this year, you push it all in. You go all in on Oklahoma from this point moving forward. So I don't have doubts about them. Vulnerable to injury in some places, but if that pans out, if we don't have a bunch of red Sharpies on the depth chart in November, they're as good as anyone out there.
Yeah, I think they feel better than they did in the spring about their backup quarterback situation. But I've said
Sell me on backup quarterback, because I don't know a lot about that.
You're gonna love this. There's really 2 options now. There's a freshman, but they're trying to bring him along, kind of slowly, highly recruited kid named Nick Evers. But one kid's name is Davis Bevel.
Yeah.
The other, General Booty.
I know General.
I think as 2 guys on the radio call for OU games, you can imagine which one we are hoping ends up winning the backup quarterback job.
Can you imagine in the NIL era? Well, how many endorsements? How many endorsements do you have to say no to for General Booty in the NIL era?
He also is. I mean, I got no problem saying that. He's a really good looking kid too.
Oh yeah.
So very marketable.
He's a stud. He's a stud player though. He's athletic. He's a kid that really flew under the radar. He played at, I think, 4 different high schools. But he's got the pedigree, comes from a really athletic family that, what was his uncle played in the NFL, went to junior college, and it was through the COVID kind of recruiting period. So whenever he was moving high schools, coaches couldn't go out and see him at different places. So he's stud. They really like him.
So let me ask this question. Not week one, but if there were a time this season where a guy is called upon, is he the guy at Oklahoma? And is that an offense that do they feel like they can still win football games with their 2 option at quarterback?
And there's a lot of training camp left, right? I think they feel a lot better about it, but I still am of the belief Dillon Gabriel goes down, this team's in trouble. I that's the way I still feel. Now, maybe one of these guys really separates themselves, and we talked about the biggest questions on here, Josh. We talked about the biggest questions heading into training camp for OU, and QB2 was one of the biggest questions. I still think that's a big question. I think that Dillon Gabriel might be the single most important person to his team in all of college football, and clearly staying healthy is the key. So, yeah, Ted, you may feel differently. I think they feel better about the backup quarterback situation, but it would not be a good situation if Dillon Gabriel goes down, which clearly anyone that loses their starter, not what you want.
Well, here's the thing about backup quarterback. If a 1-game scenario, I mean, it would depend on who the game is and when like how much time was there for preparation? Is it like the day before? But like whenever you just look at the overall thing, I agree that Dillon Gabriel is super important to this team. But when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about like winning the Big 12 and making a college football playoff. This team is going to be built totally different than what we've seen in the past. And they will be less reliant on quarterback than they ever were under Lincoln Riley. The running game with Jeff Lebby's system is going to be excellent. This is not a put everything on the quarterback. You've got tools. You've got your running game, which is excellent. You've got tempo, which is excellent. And you're going to have a defense that is vastly superior than what you've thrown out on the field in recent years. So whenever you look at those things, that insulates the quarterback position a little bit. But, just like anyone else, if your quarterback goes down, you're in serious trouble. There's very few teams out there that can maintain that level of play, but they've become a far more diverse football team than in the past, where it was all quarterback driven. We go where Baker takes us. We go where Kyler takes us. And that's always going to be true to a certain extent, but they're definitely going to be a much more well-rounded team.
I would encourage people, if you just listen to what Teddy said there, and you're not familiar with Jeff Lebby necessarily and his style of play. There was a game a couple of years ago when he was at Ole Miss where they pushed Bama. They ended up losing. It was like a pinball final score, but it was like 62-48 or something like that. And it was shot for shot. No one could get a stop.
And
you
Saban
might think
was
to yourself,
so pissed afterwards.
Yeah. You might think to yourself, oh, they must have just bombed away on Alabama all day. Go look at the box score. They ran the ball in Alabama unlike I've seen anyone able to run the ball in Alabama, and they didn't expect it. Lane said after the game, we didn't think we were going to have that kind of success. It was almost like they ran the ball to window dress early in the game, and they kept on ripping off 8-yard, 12-yard, 6-yard, and they stuck with it, and that was what kept them in that game that day. And that stuck with me. Like, that's because when Ole Miss has been at their best under Lebby, that's what they did. And I have no reason to doubt that's what they'll do at Oklahoma.
Yeah, it's kind of a mid-zone based attack. They got a lot of variations. So it's going to be interesting to see what OU's O-line, like the level that they play at. I got all the faith in the world in Bill Bedenbaugh, but we'll see. Okay, hey, Josh, before we let you get out of here, one of your things, and it's funny because we had Neil Brown on last week, and he talked about the need for a commissioner that oversees all of college football. He said to us, what revenue generator doesn't have someone in charge? And one of your things that you're always talking about on the Late Kick is what you would do if you were the college football commissioner. So what would be your first items of business? You get the call tomorrow. What would be your first couple items of business if you were named CFB commissioner?
I would want to overhaul the college football calendar. We had the personnel and recruiting symposium in Nashville last week, and all the DPPs and all the recruiting coordinators came in town. It was a closed session, but I was allowed to be a part of it. There were some really good ideas thrown around in there, and yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And so with the calendar, I would absolutely put windows in for transfer portal. I would do something that the NFL does. See, I'm against the professionalization of college football. I love this sport to death. I do not want it to emulate the NFL. That doesn't mean there aren't certain things that the NFL does better than you that you couldn't adopt. And one of the things they do, Teddy, we were talking about it 20, 30 minutes ago, understanding how to construct a calendar is pivotal. We're in the entertainment business. Make no mistake about it. This is the entertainment business. And if college football would take what they already have and just reshuffle it around, they'd get so much more juice out of the squeeze. For example, the concept of scheduling games 7 and 8 years out is ludicrous, always has been, always will be. So here's what I would love to do. I would love to, before spring starts, I would love to have a huge, or maybe right after spring ends. You can pick whenever you want to do it. Probably pre-spring, so you could work on it in spring. I would love to have a staple, like a tent mark event or a tent pole event, and we release schedules for that year, or at least conference schedules at that time. It gets a lot of juice and a lot of interaction in the spring. But then also at the conclusion of spring, I want you to have the ability, not mandating it, I want you to have the ability to schedule an actual game, probably with an FCS opponent that you can pay to come in there. And I want you to be able to have a real, or at least a simulated to real game at the end of spring, which gives me another event for television inventory purposes. I would love to then have my second transfer portal window post spring. I would absolutely love to put some parameters and an extended dead period at some point in July. I'm in favor of an early signing day before the season starts, and then eliminating the December signing period. So you just either got that one in July, late July, let's call it, or you're going to wait until February. I am wholeheartedly a proponent, the more I listened to it, talked about last week, of an offer database where there is no such thing anymore as a committable and a non-committable offer. If I'm offering Gabe Ikard, then it's going in a database. And if I tell you you're offered, I have to be able to take your not only commitment, but your signature. And that kind of does away with signing day, but it solidifies what an offer is. And it probably greatly cuts down on the foolishness that currently exists where teams put out 300 and 400 offers knowing they can only take 25. Speaking of 25, I'd love to eliminate that number. And I would love to just make you stick to 85 scholarship players. And if you lose 31, you can sign 31. If you lose 18, you can sign 18. We have to very much guard against the outright cutting of players in that model. So we'd have to have some conference alignment on that. But you asked for one idea, that's like half a dozen ideas.
Before, real quickly, how many playoff teams?
If I had my way, 2.
Yeah.
Realistically, I understand where we're going. So I guess if I have to expand, I'd go to 6. That's not realistic. So if they do expand, I hope it stops at 8. But I'm not in favor of auto bids at all. That's my thing. I don't like auto bids. If I take 8 Big Ten teams, so be it. I don't like auto bids at all. But I never get into too deep an argument about it because I just don't care about the playoff enough to argue about it. I love the regular season. And then anything that comes afterwards just comes afterwards. But like those 12 Saturdays, I guess that's my playoff. That's what I love the most.
Okay. Last one. We've kept you for way too long. I apologize for nothing. But the Any Given Saturday tour this year, what stops or what ones do you have written in stone already? Or is it seriously like, hey, the week before you make that decision? Or do you kind of have a general idea of where you might be each week?
Okay, so it's very important to note for trademarking purposes, every given Saturday tour.
I'm so sorry.
I don't want lawsuits falling on anyone's head around here. Trust me, I looked into it. So I don't know where we're going to be week 1, although I'm close to deciding that. But we could have Cincy, Arkansas. We could have Utah, Florida. Could have Notre Dame, Ohio State. The week 2 game, I'm pretty sure we have locked in Bama at Texas. After that, I have no idea. And I normally don't even decide it until we fly back in town and Sunday morning, the dust is settled and we look across the landscape. And I'll tell you what those SIDs really love. They really love hearing from a bunch of folks at CBS on a Tuesday saying, hey, we need 3 or 4 field passes. We're bringing a crew. Make it happen. Thanks, guys. That's what they really love more than anything.
Brutal.
I will say, week 3, I wouldn't mind seeing.
Yes.
I wouldn't mind seeing you in Lincoln, Nebraska, man. I'm just saying.
You got to call whoever you got on the line in Lincoln. You got to say, I don't know if you guys have been to Ireland before. I'm going to need you to win that game, though. Got to make that thing matter.
Got to
I can't
beat
be going up there if they've already lost.
That's a good point. Both teams need to be undefeated going into that game.
We got Penn State at Auburn in that same week, and both those teams may be undefeated still. And as we all know, you got to catch those teams this year while you can, while they still got a goose egg in the loss column, because I don't think that's going to last. So I want to go to Lincoln. I've never been to Lincoln, but my balls are in their court, as I like to say.
Pate, you're the man. I'm so happy to continue to be able to watch your success. I mean, you put the work in, and I think everyone that works in this space has a great amount of respect for the way that you go about your business. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time, man.
No, I appreciate both of you having me on. It's a really good product. I sneak a listen in a couple of times a month at the very least. And so this is one I'll go to. I'll say that. I don't go to many of them. I don't have time to listen to a whole lot, but this is one I will go to. And I don't say that about very many products in our space, but I really, really appreciate you guys having me on.
That means a lot, man. Thanks.